Well, Bruce Larson is a fairly well-known Christian author, lives in California, has a big family, 5 or 6 kids. He took them bicycling a while back out in the country, and he saw a sign that said, Naturalist Camp. We thought, well, how cool. I'll just take my kids and we'll go look at nature. He soon found out what Naturalist Camp means, as 5 totally naked men rode up on bikes right beside his family. Before he could say a thing, his 5-year-old said, Dad, they're not wearing their helmets. And the moral is that sometimes you're missing something that's really important and you're not even seeing it, okay? That's how my ministry started. I didn't come from a Christian background. The only Christian on either side of my family was my father's mother. My people are from Central Texas. You'll meet them in bars, you'll meet them in jails. You wouldn't meet them at church. And when Mom and Dad got married, had lots of issues, and split up. So I wound up in Temple, Texas, living with my mom and my brother. My dad lived in Dallas. And this was back in a time, thankfully, when divorce was not as common, and even non-Christian people frowned on it for the sake of kids. So all the counsel my parents got was, you got 2 boys, why are you doing this? So my mom and dad decided to try to put their marriage back together. We moved back up to Dallas into a rent house because they weren't sure if it was going to work. And they made a decision. We're going to start going to church. And we did, man. We started going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night. Google it. There used to be something called Sunday night church. Wednesday night, if there was a week-long gospel meeting, we went every single night except Thursday because that was my parents' bowling league. But I mean, we became that family. I was in 2nd or 3rd grade when they got back together, about 7 years old. That's when I heard my call to preach. See, I can't explain it in any other way except a call. Because I can't say I decided to be a preacher because of my godly grandfather. I mean, my grandfather was not godly. I became a preacher because of the great preacher. I didn't know any preachers. I have no words to describe it except a call. And I announced to the world by 2nd grade, I'm going to be a preacher. And I always pursued that call. Every now and I'll talk about this a little bit tomorrow. I had a season of my life where I tried to run from it. But deep down I knew I was supposed to do this. I went to ACC because I only heard of 2 Christian colleges my whole life. One was in Oklahoma and one was in Abilene. And I visited Abilene and they had a bowling alley. I thought, duh, I'm going here. And it was that profound of a spiritual motivation. So I graduated from Abilene and I started preaching at a church across town called Southern Hills. 21 years old when they hired me. I had 7 sermons in my file, period. I had not preached 20 times in my life. They hired me to be the preacher. I had no idea what they were thinking. But the church started to grow and neat things started to happen and students started to come in big numbers. And it led me to a misunderstanding. That if I would just preach good sermons and live a life of integrity, the church is guaranteed to grow. Well, if you live right next to a college or if you're on a side of town where everyone's building houses, that might be true for a little while. But what I began to see over a while is that if you preach a nice sermon and you live a life of integrity, people will like you. They'll pat you on the back and they'll give you a cost of living raise, hopefully. But your church won't grow. Because what was missing that I did not understand, and no fault of ACU, but I wasn't taught at that time, was the importance of leadership. Churches won't grow if they aren't led. Sheep, and often the Bible uses the metaphor of sheep for people of God. Sheep never come to a shepherd and say, take us to a new pasture, because they're fearful. Sheep will stay right where they are until the grass is gone and the water is dirty. It's the job of the shepherd to say, this is where we are, but if I don't take you through a valley, and a valley's scary, to get you to a new pasture, we have no future. That's the job of leadership. That's what I came to understand. That's the component of my training and ministry that was missing, that I've spent the last 20 years trying to learn. How can I be a better leader. So years ago when Rick said, come to our leadership summit, I said, why do I need to come? I'm not a business major. I don't know finance or accounting. What would I have to offer? But then I got to thinking, but I have learned a lot about leadership. Because I lead the greatest volunteer army in the world. See, my army is a volunteer army. I'm nobody's boss. I write nobody's check. I can't say to anybody, get down and give me 20. If you go on that mission trip, if you give to our church, if you teach 3-year-olds, it's because you've chosen to. It's because you've been inspired to. That's what leaders do. What leaders do, they paint a picture of a desired future that is so compelling that you're willing to sacrifice and risk where you are to get there. That's what leaders do. And by the way, you need to become skilled in leadership because it's in your future. If you're going to teach 3rd grade, you're going to be a leader. If you're going to have a small group in your home at your church, you're going to be a leader. If you're going to take some teens on a mission trip, you're going to be a leader. If you're going to head a task force in your business to solve a problem, you're going to be a leader. And if you decide someday to marry and have kids, I promise you have become a leader. Because leadership is more than title. You don't have to have a position to be a leader. You don't have to even have designated authority to be a leader. But you have to have this compelling vision of this desired future that is worth risking to go pursue. And people want to go with you to get it, okay? That's what leadership does. That's what I'm trying to learn how to do better. So what I want to do today is share with you the single most important lesson I have learned about leadership. And then tomorrow, I'd like to share with you the single greatest reason leaders with great intentions get derailed, okay? Real simple. So, my mom and dad got back together, and one of the commitments they made is we're going to do stuff together as a family. We started doing stuff we never did before, like go on vacations. And if we played Little League, Mom and Dad were there for every game. If we did Y Indian guys, I was there with my dad. So my brother and I got past all that. My dad just came in one day when I was in middle school with golf clubs and said, we're taking up golf. And we did. We went down to Sears. My dad worked for Sears. Everything I owned in my life until I went to ACU was from Sears. And we bought 4 sets of golf clubs, and we started playing golf as a family. I can only imagine the language of the group behind us those first couple of years. But that's how I fell in love with golf. It wasn't even so much the game, because I'm not a very good golfer, but I fell in love with golf because golf is what we did as a family. So I love to play golf. Now, I'm from the Fort Worth area. And there's a PGA Tour event every year that comes to Fort Worth. It's called the Colonial. And some of the greatest golfers in the world, like Jordan Spieth, come to the Colonial. Well, he was an ACU Alumnus of the Year named Lance Sparrow. He was in school when I was. Lance is the producer of golf for CBS Sports. I mean, he's big time. And so about 10 years ago, Lance had a slot in the Pro-Am. Pro-Am, on the tournament starts on Thursday. On Wednesday, spares like me get to go and play golf with professional golfers. And it costs a lot of money. I've never even pursued it because I can't afford it. But Lance gave me this spot for free. So there I am on Wednesday. I'm going to get to be on the other side of the ropes. And hundreds and thousands of people are going to watch me play golf, okay? I was scared to death because there's something about my golf game that is absolutely terrible. It's called sand play or bunker shots. And it's all in my head. It's not because I don't have the coordination or the skill to hit the shot. It's because I decide before I hit it, it's going to be bad. And so I self-fulfilling prophecy. So I prayed, Lord, please, please don't let me go into a bunker. And the Lord heard and answered my prayer for 6 holes. Then on the 7th hole, I hit my approach shot into this bunker that is so deep that when I get down into it, all I can see is the flag, the top of the flag. That's all I can see. And there's hundreds of people in the bleachers around this green watching spare me do the single thing I do worse. And I just thought, oh, this is terrible. I'm just going to swing hard, totally fail, pick up my ball, and walk in shame to the next tee. So I swung, and the ball took off. And I heard clang, and hundreds of people stood up and went nuts. I had knocked the ball into the hole on the fly. I had never done that before. I have never done it since. But that one day, I did it. And people are going nuts. Now, I know the truth about me. So what did I do? Did I shrug my shoulders and say, boy, that was luck? Are you kidding me? I strutted up to that green like, well, of course it went in the hole. That's where I was aiming. Because everybody was clapping. And applause is so captivating. And then applause will take you captive. So a couple of years ago at Easter time, you know, when you've been at one church 28 years like I have, what are you going to say at Easter you haven't said before? But the Lord gave me this idea. You remember when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, he says three things. He says, roll the stone away. That's a message of hope. Lazarus, come out. That's a message of life. But that's not the last thing Jesus said. He said, take the grave clothes off of him. That's a message of freedom. Here's a man who has experienced dynamic, supernatural life, and he can't enjoy it because he's still in bondage to the old life. So I asked the question to my church, is it possible you've been saved, you have experienced supernatural rebirth, you'll go to heaven. But right now you're experiencing hell because you're still a captive to the old life. You're still in your grave clothes. So I asked my church, what are the here's what I said. I just passed out cards. What are the areas of your life where you feel the most bondage? The areas of your life where you feel the most unable to experience the new life you're supposed to have in Jesus. And I got back thousands of cards, and I looked at every single one of them. And the way my brain works, I started just to systematize. What are the areas I'm hearing the most? And there were 5 areas more than any other where people just like you that go to churches just like mine said, I'm a Christian, but I'm not free. Number 5 was, Number 5 was anger and bitterness. So many people said, I can't be free to live in the presence because I am so in bondage to my feelings of what happened in the past. Area number 4 was money and greed. Debt and this absolute anxiety, I won't have enough tomorrow. Number 3 was sexual sin, particularly for men, particularly addiction to pornography. It is an absolute epidemic in our churches. Number 2, I thought would be number 1. It was fear and worry. I can't enjoy today because I'm so afraid of what's going to happen tomorrow. And tomorrow simply doesn't recognize your sovereignty. You're never going to get to be in control. Might as well give that out alone. But number 1, I didn't expect. The single area more than any other where my church said, I feel in bondage, was struggles with self-worth. Over and over, card after card. I don't like myself. I can't forgive myself. And especially, I'm so tired of living in the bondage of what other people think. I'm so tired of being a people pleaser. The Bible calls this the fear of man. The fear of man is the single fear mentioned more than any other kind in the Bible. Proverbs 29:25. Fear of man will prove to be a snare. Another version, fearing people's a dangerous trap. Another version, being afraid of people can get you into trouble. Another version, don't fall into the trap of being a coward. You cannot live free as long as you are afraid or as long as you were in bondage to what other people want you to be. The greatest leader in the Bible besides Jesus was Moses. And as a young man, he was trained in leadership. He was skilled in leadership. He was a dynamic man, and he had a plan. He wanted to rescue the people of God. When he murdered an Egyptian that was attacking a Hebrew, he thought the people were going to rally to him, and they didn't. It was a colossal fail. He wound up in the wilderness for 40 years, and he's through with it. He's just through with it. And then one day he sees this bush on fire, right? And he goes to investigate. And it says when the Lord saw he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses, here I am. Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. I'm the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I've indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I'm concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up into that land that is good and spacious, a land flowing with milk and honey. The cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are impressing them. And so now listen, God is going to paint a desired future. It is compelling. Now I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses, this is what you've wanted all your life. This is what you dreamed about when you were a boy. I am now commissioning you to the greatest leadership mission to date, to lead my people to freedom. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He is completely unwilling to be the leader he used to want to be. Why? Because he has become so afraid of other people. Moses answered, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say the Lord didn't appear to you? So his first big thing is, I don't have any credibility anymore. Nobody thinks I've got what it takes. You don't see how other people see me, God, or you wouldn't be asking me. And then he said, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past or since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. In other words, I don't make a good impression on people. I don't wow people. I don't have charisma. I'm never the life of the party. And it says later, the Lord's anger burned at Moses. What's Moses' problem? God's angry with Moses because God has this great vision. God has this great mission. God needs a leader. And the man he's commissioned, the man he's chosen is saying, but God, what other people think of me trumps what you want me to do. I cannot become what you want me to be because of what other people say about me. Moses suffered from what I think is the strongest addiction in our church today, and it's called, I call it approval addiction. We all have this overwhelming desire to be accepted by other people, or to put it another way, we really like to be liked. And the desire to be liked often overwhelms the desire to be right. Now, let me say that again. Our desire to be liked is so strong, it will often overwhelm our desire to be right. There was a famous study at a university some years ago where they put 10 students in a room. They were from first grade to seniors in high school, so about 6-year-old to 18-year-old, right? And it seems so simple. A person would walk into the room, there was a blackboard, they'd take a piece of chalk and they'd draw a real long line, then a medium-sized line, and then a very short line. And here's the job. Raise your hand when the person points to the longest line. Now, how hard is that? But here's what the students didn't know. 9 had been told, raise your hand when they point to the second longest line. Because what the study was doing was evaluating how will that 10th person respond. So the person walks in and points to what is clearly the longest line. And every time that 10th student would hold up their hand and then look around the room, 75% of the time, pull that hand back down. Now we're talking 6-year-olds all the way to 18-year-olds. Their desire to feel included and accepted by the group was so strong, they were willing to be clearly wrong if that's what it took to be accepted. That's how strong approval addiction is. And it comes at a high price. The pressure to conform our values, an unwillingness to risk intimacy. Because am I going to let you know who I really am if I'm afraid that if you know who I really am, you're not going to like me as much? Which then erodes my self-esteem. Because how can I feel really good about myself when I know deep down I'm faking it most of the time? And then there's just this waning willpower to stand with the few against the many. Think about it. Most of the really big regrets in our lives, most of the things where what was I thinking? We're driven by a desire to influence what other people think of us. Why'd you laugh at that joke in the dorm? It was clearly sexist or racist. But the other guys laughed. I deal with this all the time as a pastor. A lot of the guys I work with, they struggle with workaholism. What's the problem? They don't love their family? No. I don't need to tell them to start loving your family. What the problem is they are so driven to be seen as successful in the marketplace by their peers. That's why they can't break this problem. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with young women or older women who've compromised themselves sexually. Wound up in the bed of some guy they don't even like and who they know doesn't really love me. He just wants me. And I don't need to tell them the Bible says you're not. That is not the problem. The problem is they are so desperate for some man to tell them they're valuable that they'll do almost anything to hear it. And by the way, I got a plank in my eye when I talk about this because I'm a recovering approval addict. And by the way, most ministers are. Most of us who got into ministry, we got into ministry because we like people and because we like to be liked by people. I learned about my addiction early in my life. When I was a kid in school, everyone's got a rep. There's the strong kid, the fast kid, the pretty kid. I was the smart kid, okay? Which doesn't put you at the top of the ladder of cool. But at least you're not at the bottom, right? And in 3rd grade, the girl at the bottom was named Connie. And Connie was, she was not attractive. She was socially awkward. And it was never out of bounds to pick on Connie. You know how that works. So our teacher, when it was math time, and I was really good at math, we had this game where she would hold up these flashcards, and on the front would be like a multiplication question, 7 times 8 or whatever, and on the back would be the answer. And she played this game where you'd start at somebody's desk and you'd stand up and you'd hold up the card. Whoever got the answer got to go to the next desk. And whoever got all the way around the room back to their desk got a donut. And I usually got the donut. I was the smart kid. So this particular day, the teacher says to me, Rick, you pick. Let's start the game. And all the cool kids that I wanted so desperately to like me, they all gave me the same look. Don't pick me. What am I going to do? And then I realized, well, there's one person I can pick and no one's going to mind. So I said, I'll pick Connie. And the whole class laughed. Because they knew she had no chance, and she didn't. So I stood by her desk, and she stood up, and the teacher held up the card, and I had the answer before she had even read the question. And everybody laughed some more. Connie sat back down. That's a long time ago. I still remember this. I looked into her face, and her eyes did not say, I hate you. They said, why did you hurt me? I thought you were one of the nice boys. And I remember in that moment, my sick desire to be liked had in that moment turned me into somebody I didn't like. And that is the power of approval addiction. Here's what I've learned about most of us. Our problem isn't that we want to be wicked. Our problem is that we're wimpy. And where courage is absent, bondage is always present. Because here's the thing, nobody wins the people-pleasing race. You're never going to find happiness trying to keep everybody happy. And if you have entered into the people-pleasing race, here's what you're doing. You are running in circles inside a prison. And you can't escape because this race has no finish line. And let me tell you something else. There is somebody else in this race that someday is going to pass you. Here's how it works in the world. They don't applaud on the basis of grace. The world applauds performance and appearance. Did you win the most? Did you sell the most? Did you score the most? Are you the prettiest? Have you been on a magazine cover? How much money did you make? That's what the world applauds. And if you get involved in running that race, you are never going to finish, and somebody is going to pass you. J.R. Vassar goes to Asia, and he goes to this site where this famous Buddha was, and so he saw all these people, desperately poor people, giving the last of their money in front of this statue, hoping this Buddha will bless them. And he goes around the back, and there's scaffolding because the Buddha is deteriorating, and they're having to repair it. And he thought, how sad. Broken people are praying to a broken Buddha while people try to fix the broken Buddha. And yet, are we that different? Are we that different? It's just not worth it to enter a race where other people determine your worth. It is bondage, and it leads to significant spiritual damage. Because pleasing people often means you have to displease God. Isn't that true? You read your Bible, you know the stories. How many times in the Bible was the brave man, the brave woman, the courageous leader, the person that was willing to do what the crowd didn't want to do? Apostle Paul said in Galatians 1 verse 10, obviously I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant. Free people live for an audience of one. So here's what I've learned. You ready? The single most important leadership principle I've ever learned. I have to learn to live out of my blessing and not for your blessing. That's it. I have to learn to live out of the blessing of God and who God says I am and what God says about me, instead of trying to live every day hoping you will give me a blessing. I have to live out of who God says I am instead of waiting for you to tell me who I am. If I'm going to be a leader, I have to find my worth in God and not in public opinion poll. You see, somebody's already proved how much I'm worth. Now, you're going to live in bondage if you live your life for a blessing. What if you lived your life from a blessing? What if you decided that love and worth were conferred on you before anybody measured your appearance, before anybody gauged your performance? What if worth was already conferred on you. Here's what Scripture says in Ephesians. Long before he laid down earth's foundations, he had us in mind, and he settled on us as the focus of his love. See, that's what God did for Moses. Throw your staff down on the ground. It became a snake. Now, I don't know about you. I am irrationally afraid of snakes, okay? I was playing golf one time. I was carrying my clubs, and I was looking for my ball in the creek with the tall grass, because that's where my ball winds up, is in the tall grass. And I felt something under my foot. And I looked down, and I am standing on a coiled water moccasin. That creek was 15 feet across. Now, you wouldn't think an old man with a bag on his back could, standing still, jump 15 feet in the air and get on the other side. You would be wrong. Properly motivated, it is possible. Okay. That's my fear of snakes. Then God says, pick it up by the tail. If you know anything, the last thing you're going to do with a poisonous snake is pick it up by the tail where it can still bite you. But he does, and it turns into a staff again. What's God doing? God is saying, Moses, the things that you are letting scare you are things I can take care of. By the way, in those days, Pharaoh had a headdress, and he had a snake on it. Remember that? What God is trying to say to Moses is, you ask me a question, who am I? And here's my answer, I am. I'm sending you to lead my people because you know that I am is with you. In other words, Moses, I want you to live from your blessing and not for a blessing. Because leadership is hard. You can read in Exodus. People grumble, people fuss. I've learned that in life. Let me tell you, when you lead a volunteer army, every week you get an email telling you what a lousy pastor you are. Every week. In the old days, they had to write letters. Now they get on their phones and they send it to you before you even get up to your office. Okay? I cannot lead well if every day I fret and worry, oh, what's somebody going to say? What's somebody going to do? Is someone going to leave and go to some other church? Is someone going to write a blog? I can't lead well that way. I have to lead out of my sense of who I am in God, what mission God's given me, and when I hear his well done, I don't need you to clap for me to tell me I'm okay. Okay? I've already heard the only applause that really matters. That doesn't mean you don't listen to people. It doesn't mean you ask for feedback. What it does mean is I don't find my worth in how many attaboys I get every Sunday. Now, God didn't give us a staff. God gave us something better. It says, God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. See, God is the only person who's an expert on your worth. Now, to illustrate that, I want y'all to meet Tim. I brought Tim with me. Tim is the world's ugliest teddy bear. Now, I know that because Tim is my teddy bear. I don't even know how he got the name Tim. I just know I had him since I was a baby, and that's what I called him, and that's who he is. This is Tim. And if you could look at him close, you could see that his nose is bent, his eyes don't move. In the back, he's all sewed up where the stuffing has come out dozens of times. He is one ugly bear. So my senior year in high school, before I was to go off to ACU, my parents were moving to a new town, and so they decided to have a garage sale. So I come home from school, and there's all these tables out in the garage and in the driveway with stuff to sell. And on one of those tables was Tim with a Post-it note on it, 25 cents. I picked Tim up, and I went and found my mother. And for the only time in my life, I called her to public repentance. And I made it clear that Tim was never to be sold to anybody at any time for any price. And here's why. Because Tim's worth is determined by the one who owns him and who loves him. And so is yours. If you're going to be a leader, you got to decide, where do I get my sense of worth? Where do I get my well done from? Who tells me who I am? Because here's the thing. Right now, you're determining your worth based on how you see yourself in the eyes of others or how you see yourself in the eyes of God. Right? And when you become convinced that you matter to God, it won't matter what others think. The love of God will crowd out the need to be applauded by the crowd. And when you know who you are, you also know who you don't have to be. That is so huge. Because as you guys graduate and enter into the marketplace, into this secular culture, there is going to be every single day pressure to tell you who you need to be. But you can leave the prison of other people's expectations. And it is so liberating to be so conscious of God's approval that nobody else can tell me how to live or who to love. Because here's the coolest thing about this principle. Anybody freed by love can love anybody. And you can't lead well if you don't love well. I love the people I lead. I love the people I lead more than I love the mission or the place I'm trying to take them. But when I am freed by the love of God, I am completely free to love people well. Because here's the thing, you can't be a lover and a pleaser. Because applause is always conditional. People don't applaud on the basis of grace. They applaud on the basis of performance and appearance. But when you leave the prison of people-pleasing, you're free to give unearned, undeserved, unconditional love. Here's the why. Because I'm not loving you so that you will give me a attaboy. And that's why John could say, we love because he first loved us. See, I as a leader, I can do what I believe is best for you. And I can love you, and I don't need you to tell me I'm okay. I don't need you to tell me I'm cool. I don't need you to tell me I'm really good. I don't. I can love you best when I'm loving you out of God's love for me, and not so I get something back from you. And by the way, I think that's how Jesus lived. You ever thought about this? Why could Jesus love everybody? It's because Jesus didn't care what anybody thought. Jesus, she's a streetwalker. You can't let her wash your feet. Jesus didn't decide who he would love based on what other people are going to say. Jesus, he's a tax collector. You can't go into his house. Watch how Jesus loved people. He could love everybody because he didn't care what anybody thought. Jesus was so conscious of God's well done. He was so conscious of blessing. He was so conscious God told him who he was, that he didn't make decisions based on what are other people going to say about me. And I want to be that free. So that year that my folks separated, my mom needed to do something with me. They didn't have a lot of daycare options back then, so she actually started me in a private school when I was 5 years old. They didn't have kindergarten until I went to first grade. So what that meant was I was always the youngest in my class, always. I started ACU when I was 17. Okay, so when I'm a freshman in high school, by the end of my year, some of my friends are getting their driver's license. Okay, by the end of my sophomore year, all of my friends are getting their driver's license. I'm a junior starting high school. I still don't have my driver's license. I'm not 16 yet. Now, that does not put you very high on the cool factor in high school, okay? I wasn't big and strong. I wasn't an athlete. I didn't date a cheerleader. I mean, I'm not at the bottom of the who's cool, but I'm certainly not near the top. But the bottom was Daryl. Daryl was the Connie of my high school. Daryl was a nerd back before we had the word. He really was. He literally had the pocket protector with the pins in it. He literally had tape on his glasses, his big black horn-rimmed glasses. He was socially awkward. And everybody piled on Daryl. I want you to imagine you get on the bus to go to school, and every single day, your self-esteem takes a beating before you even get to school. That was Daryl's life. Now, what a lot of the guys at school didn't know that I knew, because Daryl lived just a few houses up the street from me, was that Daryl's father was alcoholic and a very angry man. More than once, I could walk by Daryl's house in the evening and hear his dad just screaming at Daryl. And my guess is it wasn't just screaming. Well, anyway, I finally turned 16 during my junior year. And I had scraped together about $600 to go buy an old Chevy. I'm driving to school. No more getting rides, no more on the bus. I'm driving to school. I can't wait, because everybody knows when you pull into the parking lot in your own car, your cool factor goes up just a notch. And my cool factor needed to go up a little bit. So it's the night of the first day that I'm going to drive to school. And I'm sitting down with the family for supper, and there's a knock on the door. And I go to the door, and it's Daryl. Rick, is that your car? Yeah, Daryl, that's my car. Are you going to drive it to school tomorrow? Yeah, I'm going to take it to school. Can I have a ride? I'm not proud of this. But for just a split second, you know exactly what went through my mind. Give Daryl a ride? The least popular kid in school? This is my moment. I have waited a long time. This is my chance to finally be a little bit more cool. And then, just like I did years ago with Connie, I looked into Daryl's eyes and I realized Daryl wasn't asking me for a ride. Daryl was asking me for a rescue. Sure, Daryl, I'll give you a ride, and I did. I took Daryl to school every single day the rest of the year. Did not help my cool factor. Did not get me invitations to any of the coolest parties. Being known as Daryl's best friend, well, nobody else wanted the job, I'll put it that way. But you know, I got to know Daryl. Daryl was a good kid who had been dealt a tough hand. And if you ever got past all the approval addiction and just got to actually know the guy, he was okay. That summer, I'm in the backyard, and up the alley, I hear this terrible clunking noise, and I look, and there's an old car driving up, belching smoke. And it stops at the backyard, and Daryl gets out. Rick, I got a car. And I wanted you to be the first person to see it. That's a long time ago. And I didn't have any knowledge back then of the Holy Spirit. All I can tell you in that moment, I tangibly felt the smile of God. And that's how I want to live. That's who I want to be, and I'm absolutely persuaded that's how I can help other people more than any other way. That's how I can be the best leader I can possibly be. If I can live out of my blessing, and not for your blessing, I will